Okay, welcome. Well, here we are again. We've got another semester. I see we've got a nice crowd here. You look very respectful. You know, just one thing. We actually did have one class last semester where nobody's cell phone went off. So I'm really hoping we can manage 2 this semester. So please turn off your cell phone. Wear your name tag. Oh, heck with the rest of this. Wisdom Wednesday. All you members and guests are invited to attend Wisdom Wednesday presentation, 2:30 to 4 right here. This is a really important one if you didn't hear my previous message, because this is about the Village Friends, who's a really wonderful organization that's really helpful to people. The next thing I want to ask is, do we have anybody here that's on complimentary pass? Raise your hand. Oh, congratulations. Welcome, welcome. Complimentary pass people. I am the head of the development committee, so we're hoping that you'll enjoy yourself and sign up, because you'll help my numbers. You know, I got to keep my job around here. All right. Well, we don't care about the rest of this anyway, do we? Probably not. I mean, do you really need to know that the fall term starts next September? I mean, probably don't need that. All right, anyway. Well, you may remember, those of you that were here, that we ended with the, you know, the good part of the Middle Ages. Things were going really happy, and, you know, we had cities going up, and we had cathedrals going up, and people were educated, and they were eating, and everything was going along really well, okay? I mean, it was just like, whoa, this is good to be in Europe right now. Well, now we're in the late Middle Ages, and guess what? Bam! Okay? All right, climate change. Oh, the crops failed. We're all starving. Okay. Well, let's have a 100 Years' War. That won't be a problem. Well, maybe, you know, the papacy is going to fall apart. You know, that won't be too big a problem. But, you know, there is one thing else going on. It's that doggone pandemic, you know. That Black Plague really gets to be a problem when you're trying to have a new civilization. So, to quote Hobbes, life again in the Middle Ages becomes nasty, brutish, and short. Well, now it is my pleasure to introduce a man whose lectures are funny, educational, but your break is going to be really short. Dr. Joseph Kicklighter.
Oh, boy. Welcome, everybody. You never know what it's going to end. You just never know. So, yes, indeed. The break, I hope, will be short. And is it 3.5 minutes now? We've been reduced. Breaks are like sales, you know. We have half off. So we're going down, down, down. We are talking about the so-called late medieval period, and this will go on the whole term, because even though the areas we cover are very selected, there is so much material that we of necessity have to do this basically by themes. And I don't think any theme is more important or more interesting for purposes of tourists than talking about the late medieval papacy in particular. I say church, but by this point in the West, so many people identified the Catholic Church with the Pope that I think in some ways only, we can use the term synonymously. You'll notice that I put authority and influence because I didn't want to use the term belief or faith. As far as I am aware, we are far from any major challenge to the Christian belief system of this civilization. So we shouldn't think of the 14th and 15th centuries as a kind of enlightenment when people can denounce Christianity as such. Perhaps they are simply denouncing how the beliefs are carried out and institutionalized. We will look at that. And obviously, authority is going to be a major question. It will be in future centuries when you read about Luther and Calvin and others. Who is really in charge here? Noticing the major issues as I saw them, it will be a question, of course, of the popes wanting to say, we are the leaders of a Christian society, and anyone who's a Christian, including a king, is of necessity under our authority. This point has been argued about and fought over now for centuries. Emperors have come and gone over these principles. By this point, it is fair to say that the emperors, I always hate to use the word negligible, but I will, they're no longer major factors in the politics. There are Holy Roman emperors. There will be until Napoleon Bonaparte. But when we talk about who's really important, no longer are the emperors, which, as you understand, is going to completely destroy the idea of the balance in medieval society between the Pope leads the soul and the emperor leads the body. All of that's long gone. But, of course, the monarchs of France and England and elsewhere are going to challenge the Pope's right to interfere in the churches of those realms. Not completely, but extensively. Secondly, and some people really forget this, the Pope and his relationship with other bishops can sometimes be unpleasant. Sometimes, I mean, the Pope is a bishop, and he addresses them. They don't address him, but he addresses them as brother. How y'all doing, brother? You know, that kind of thing. And you'd say, oh, well, we're all real chummy. If you know your place, we're chummy. My place is on top and yours is not. And that is so much the idea. It's as if bishops, not only in terms of how they're treated, they can get over that, but it's what's going to come out of our pocketbook. Because more and more revenues are going to be taken for papal purposes. Their installment fees, their annual dues. And you say, are we being nickeled and dimed? I've had students who've made that point, and you'll understand that. But that is the idea. I mean, it's tough being a bishop sometime because the papal government will expect more. And if you think, we will just wait until we receive a love offering or something like that, no. We actually have the revenue reports from papal agents in England because, you know, April 15th will be here. We know that there are individuals who do this and they love their lives, but they're responsible for sucking as much blood out of turnips as they can. And that's what papal officials will do. And again, I think there is a sense over and over again that in appointments and revenues that popes can often override their bishops. And this, of course, will have a lot to do with bureaucracy and administration. And those of you who have worked in large organizations will understand that sometimes in I have compared administrators to kudzu. Yes, I think they grow themselves.
That's good.
You know, I don't care how many, they'll get more. And guess what? They all want a dental plan. They all want this and that and the other. Yes. As a result, of course, you got the growth of administration, and they've all got to be paid for, and somebody's going to pay. And it's not going to be from love offerings, I can tell you that. It's got to come from various sources of revenue, all of which creates problems. Finally, of course, the issue of heresies. I could never forget heresies. These will be interesting to look at and compare when we get there to the heresies of yore. But basically, they are, some would say, precursors to Protestant ideas. And we will look at those. They do not lead necessarily in a clear line to Luther and Calvin, but they are certainly indications of where the thoughts of some people are at this time. Just in case you've forgotten, you get to look at him again. Boniface VIII, 1294 to 1303. Years we won't forget soon. He was considered the last of the great medieval popes, great in quotation mark. He had a lot of power. He was, in his own mind, another Innocent III, all-powerful, but he suffered many embarrassments during his papal time. Embarrassments because he would issue a document, which some still accept, I assume, and I'm quoting now, every human creature is subject to the Roman Pope. You say, whoa, that's sweeping. I think so. And he had a word for the Greeks. I mean, Orthodox. He would say, so, you think you're getting in through another shepherd other than Peter? Losers? And you say, well, that's not very Christian. Well, he's just trying to show you the right way. And so sometimes you have to hurt people to show them that right way. Well, Boniface he would not make your list of top 10 favorite popes. I definitely think that. Dante fans will recognize him as hellbound, okay? So we'll get to that soon enough, no question about that. But on to where our scene is going to be in the post-Boniface world. Some of you are very familiar with that particular part of southern France, and you will see the place where actually one of our class attendees actually lived, down in Aix-en-Provence. Many of you have been to Nice, and not that far from Nice is the famous Avignon, which today is a great cultural and artistic center, and it became so in the 14th century while the popes resided there. Now, as we get to this, let me add that no one, as far as I'm aware in the Catholic Church, ever considered this another Rome. This is simply where popes, 7 of them, resided during certain years of papal development in the 14th century. But it was never considered a holy place in and of itself. Actually, Rome has associations with Gregory I and Leo I and all sorts of people who are instrumental in the earliest Christian history, but not Avignon. Avignon is certainly not. And its enemies, including someone who was a bureaucrat in its government, the famous Italian writer Petrarch, nothing like biting the hand that feeds you, because he actually had a job in Avignon, but he and others would call it the Babylonian captivity, after the idea of Jews living in Babylon. And the idea, I suppose, is that the papacy, the See of St. Peter, had been taken over by French, and not good French, bad French. Because remember, Petrarch is an Italian, so there might be the slightest bit of resentment there, even though you're mighty close to home, which I think is an important factor. No one of these seven, and I was thinking this morning, you know, I was naming the Avignon popes as I was walking around the house, and I was just thinking, gosh, it's so much better to do popes and presidents, because, you know, these are only 7 of these, not counting the anti-popes, and we'll get to them too. But it's like, yeah, you have to be careful there, get your list right. But it is very interesting that, as far as I'm aware, none of them ever said, home sweet home. We always want to be in Avignon. It was always regarded as somewhere that we will leave eventually and return to where we're supposed to be. This is more or less a place of safety, while Rome and surrounding area is more or less insecure. And security of the personhood of the Pope was obviously a major factor, and the history of 14th, 15th century Italy is nothing if it's not warfare. And you would say, you mean, aren't these people all Catholics? Yeah, but that doesn't, you know, if I were in insurance, I'd be real careful about writing a policy on a pope at that time, because, you know, have to pay mighty high premiums, because it's dangerous to be in that world, the world of fighting amongst ruling class people. So, once they thought Rome was secure, the papacy and all of those involved in the papacy would return to where they were supposed to be. Why it took so long is a matter of speculation, but certainly the early years bears very much his name. He was the King of France, Philip IV, who had such terrible conflicts with Boniface VIII. And it is said that when the first Pope of Avignon, the first Pope who lived in Avignon, lived there, there was sort of an understanding between King Philip and the new Pope. An understanding that we can work together to create a better and a brighter Christendom, that sort of thing. And you're thinking, do you think there was collusion? Do you think there was? I'm thinking the popes may have understood that Philip could be somewhat intimidating, as we'll see. But the funny thing is, I have read that he was very devoutly Catholic. But that doesn't mean he's not going to dominate popes. I guess it worked for him. But he didn't get the inconsistency there. That, yes, he was very devoted to his own faith, but at the same time, he wanted, in many ways, to control the affairs of the church, because he didn't want some sassy Boniface Part 2 coming along trying to tell him how to run things. So that was that. Now you say, gosh, he was a nice-looking man. Well, I'm not so sure about that. Some of you who have been tourists will recognize the portrait because it's from Avignon. When you walk around the palace, you will see these portraits, and I think it's sort of like Joe Q, average Pope, you know, they all have these, you know, standard faces. He was an individual I've thought about a lot of my life, yes, I can promise you, because he is from the English-ruled part of France, Bordeaux and that area. And you say, why was he Pope? Well, it gets complicated. He was not even a cardinal, not even a cardinal, so he hadn't made the top grade. But he is Archbishop of one of the most important cities in France. And he was a member of this very important southern French family. And I guess the cardinals thought that Philip IV would like it if they chose this man who became Clement V. Now again, he's not a cardinal, so he's not participating. So you can imagine they sent messages to him and said, guess what, you're the new pope. And he said, oh really? Oh shucks, I feel so unworthy. You know, and that kind of thing. Because if he was involved with the election, or as some rumors said, that Philip IV had tried to utilize his power because Clement V was going to be friendly to French interests, we'll never know. There are stories both ways. There are also stories that because he had English connections, remember he was Archbishop of Bordeaux, he had actually worked as a bureaucrat in the English king's government. So he has ties with both English and French. Nevertheless, once he became Pope, and I guess, and I've thought about this a long time, he had to travel, had quite a trip, and he would stop. I mean, it wasn't any rush trip, because there was no chance of getting all the way to Rome. He had his coronation, though, and they should have known there was going to be a problem. The coronation was in a French city of Lyon. In Georgia, we call it Lyons. Okay? but this is Lyon. And this is awful. I mean, a lot of people fell off a wall. You know, the wall collapsed during his coronation, and that might have given a hint that this may be an unhappy time to be Pope. It sort of starts out bad from the coronation onward. He was Pope. He seemed to have been a sick man physically, maybe cancer, for the 9-year reign. But we know that many of his deeds are not those of a strong leader. He had to give in to King Philip about the issue of the Knights Templar. Many of you know about the Knights, the monastic order, important in the Crusades, that had become a wealthy organization. And King Philip decided, based on trumped-up evidence, that the organization was wicked and evil through and through. All of this allowed Clement, well, forced Clement into dissolving the Templars, and Philip's government could take possession of their many assets in France, because I suspect the majority of their assets were in France. Elsewhere, because it wasn't exclusively France, there were branches in Britain and elsewhere. They went to other monastic orders, those assets. But it's interesting that in France, all the assets of the Knights Templars ended up in the king's pocket. Probably, well, I'm sure that Clement V agreed to it after evidence that was forced out of members of the Templars that they had engaged in all kinds of pernicious acts and were evil. All that people want to hear before they can justify whatever action they intended to take. So I think you knew where this was going. And I mentioned to you earlier about the devout faith of King Philip, but it's very interesting that this will be something for which he is responsible. As far as Clement V is concerned, he agreed for this to be done, so I suppose you have to say he is in part guilty, although I would also note that he was not in a great position to stand up to this very powerful king of France. He died in 1314, and after he was, after the cardinals met and talked, and they got to thinking, maybe we shouldn't have these young people in their 50s who become pope. Maybe we need senior power. Let's get someone with a little age on them who really knows the world. So they chose someone 70 years old. Yeah, they thought, well, that poor soul, have the unction ready, he's going. Well, he didn't. 1316 to 1334. Fooled you losers. Yeah, I'm feeling great. Guess he had his little gym there and he was working out every morning before prayers. I don't know. But yes, John 22nd. Yeah, he is the second pope. He was a lawyer, so I guess he was mean enough to be pope. He was quite a legalist, and he also, in addition to having his law credentials, he also had, I think, a CPA. He was ready to suck that blood out of the turnip, because I imagine living in Avignon is very expensive, and I'll tell you why. You're not in Italy anymore. It's where all your revenues used to be. Those were the glorious days where they just come in. In France, most of the Pope's revenues then had to be what the Pope could come up with. I think we call it creative financing. It's like, because he's got all these assets, but they are Italian-based. And those folks aren't going to say, sure, we'll write you up a check and send it up north, and we just want you to be happy because we love you, Papa. No, you're not getting it. So we get some new ones, and this was in John 22nd's reign, and I love, these are two of my favorites. Annates are basically the estimated revenues of a post for a year. So you say, gosh, well, I can't pay that. I just got the job. It's okay. We can put you on the installment plan. Yeah. With interest. Yeah. And you say, you mean? I certainly do. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Us. And you say, well, that's just for bishops. Oh, no. How about archdeacon? You know, that's a job too, isn't it? Yes, it is. Thank you. And so whatever the position was, then the idea of the annates will be a revenue. But my favorite of all is called an expectative grace, which is the greatest use of a euphemism I have ever heard. Now you say, gosh, I would love to have a position in St. So-and-so church. And you say, well, we would love to have you too. Unfortunately, all the positions are filled right now. But you are mighty smart and you really know your Bible. Well then, maybe I could get one in the next few years. I think that's a possibility. But first of all, you would need an expectative grace. And what does that mean? It means an authorization for a position that is not open. You would get, you would get one in the future, but you need to start paying now. Okay? Yes, pay early, pay often. Okay? Yes, expectative grace. But isn't that a nice term? And I've got an expectative grace. I'm just waiting for somebody to drop over. You know, like when someone stops pumping, then, whoa, here's my expectative grace. It's like, bingo, you know, I got it. I've got my expectative grace. I've been paying up to date. So that is the idea. There are more and more revenues of that sort. And he was, oddly enough, a very non-extravagant person. People have often said he had all these revenues because he just wanted to spend, spend, spend. No, there are popes like that, but he wasn't one of them. Personally, he was very frugal. I won't say parsimonious, but I will say he lived simply, almost in an ascetic way, but he is the head of the church, and he wanted to have a solid financial basis. Then, too, he would get involved in theological controversies which were not good for popes, particularly popes who are in these precarious conditions. You know, if you're living in Avignon, there are going to be people who are going to say, well, you know, the French sort of tell popes what to do, and you're trying to look like you're above the fray. But this pope was so sure of himself, I think, that he got involved in controversies in which he may have been right or wrong, I don't know. But he took positions that were sometimes unpopular. To start, to note beatific vision may sound like a heck of a matter to get involved with. Basically, it involved this. The church, the Catholic Church, taught that when the saints die, they immediately see God and the heavenly sphere. However, he decided, and I guess there were people whose views he had checked out, he said, I agree with them, that no one has the beatific vision till after the second coming of Christ. In other words, until then, everyone sleeps. And then it's sort of like you get up and then you say, oh, well, what's next? He said, well, you're going to hell right now. Yeah, so that, yeah. Now, you special few, you'll say, oh, you got a big, nice surprise coming. This beatific vision for you. The rest of you, keep going. There's a fire waiting for you. But that is the idea. So now maybe you get the idea about why this was so controversial. Because many people feel his view was perfectly right theologically, but it's sort of like going into this business with the Franciscans. Some of you will remember that we talked about the Franciscans had divided up over the issue of whether Christ and his apostles were absolutely poor. In other words, they owned nothing. And there was a group that emerged out of this in the 13th century that insisted in that absolute view. They own nothing, period, nada. And John 22nd said, you know what you are? Troublemakers. And you know another thing? I don't like you. And so, shut up, or I can put you out. Yeah, excommunication. Losers. Damn you. Yeah, it gets worse. You know, folks can get feisty when they get older. And he was feisty. Finally, he said, when he finally died, on his deathbed, he repented his views about the beatific vision and the spiritual Franciscan. But he thought the spiritual Franciscan view was just absurd, meaning that you've got to have property. You don't have to like it. I mean, many of us are unwilling bourgeois. We have to have it, but that doesn't mean we have to love it. You know, we kind of wish we could, be free of it. It's a burden. So, but that is the idea. It's not as if Christ's apostles were sitting around saying, I want to check how my market, how's my portfolio doing? I wonder if it's diverse enough. I don't think you have to do that, but basically to maintain property for utility. Because it's great to say, oh, I just love the Lord and I'm just going to. No, you got to have something going for you because you got to eat. And that was John 22nd's feelings. And it got him involved in these controversies at a time when it would have helped the popes had they not been involved in such controversies. Now, was he French? Well, as always, it depends on what you mean by French. I know it's so complicated. These popes, by and large, well, I told you Clement V was a Gascon. So he probably spoke French with an accent. Well, I'm sure he did. Spoke French with an accent. Latin is, of course, the universal language, but still, these people were French, but they were not necessarily from the part of France that would have considered the heartland. And this individual, John 22nd, was certainly not someone who was, he was from southern France also. So again, he had connections. He had worked in the French government, but I'm not so sure I would say that he was tied heart and soul to France. He had connections elsewhere. I've come across him in Anglo-French relations. So he had connections elsewhere. For those of you who haven't been here, I will know before you get the tour that it began after the reigns of Clement V and John XXII. They basically lived with the local abbot or bishop. And I can imagine, you say a guest over a long weekend can be burdensome, and you can imagine having a pope live with you and say, you know, that's like Mrs. Roosevelt and Churchill, you know, and we all have our peculiarities, and you can just imagine having the Pope live you know, and you have that long list of stuff you want, put it at your bedroom door and say, get all this taken care of before prayers tomorrow morning. So it was hard. So I'm sure that by the time of the third Pope, that there was concern for building their own structure, even as they dreamed of moving back to Rome. I mean, it's very ironic. The palace, and I'm warning you, try to alert you, it's very interesting, very beautiful, very nice, love the arts. You can go to festivals down there. Yeah, I'm telling the truth. Yeah, just wonderful. But that said, I'm building it up, because the fact is that when you take the tour, you're going to be singing that old song, Is That All There Is? Because you walk through the rooms and say, but where is the furniture? Sorry, all gone. For all those years after the Avignon popes, the buildings essentially remained vacant. It was used as a stable by Napoleon. Pretty rude, huh? So it's not surprising. You just have to sort of use your historical imagination and think about how it would have been. I mean, it's pretty grand when you look at it from the outside, and you get to see how some of the rooms were. But it was complete by the 1330s, I would say, 1340s. And all around it, and there you are, you see the great hall, and you can imagine state banquets and reception areas where the Pope received ambassadors. Avignon, which had been just a little village, now will become obviously a major city, because you will have legations from rulers everywhere. And that means, can you imagine the Avignon Chamber of Commerce? And all of these groups, you got to build more hotels, restaurants. And you say, but I hope all of their activities were above board. Were there people there for nefarious purposes? Oh, I expect so. Yes, yes. There was evil there too. All of this is to say that Avignon, going from a village, became a kind of major city, and perfect for condemnation by those Italians. Remember our Italians, they miss all that revenue. They say it's time for the Pope to come home, even a French one. So there were lots of petition drives, I suspect. Go south, Pope. Finally, a young pope actually, made the decision, despite much controversy, that he would return. One pope had tried it before. He lasted less than a year, and then he returned to Avignon. He said, yuck, this is awful. I just can't take it. He's French, you know, and yes, he was used to the comforts of Avignon. But this pope was named Gregory the 11th, and you can see he's got the flying accompaniment there. See, Peter and Paul are guiding his way, and he's there in his sedan chair. And boy, those people in Avignon, the Avignon Chamber of Commerce, everybody, they pulled out all the stops. They got his mama out there, begging him not to go. I know, that's kind of mean, isn't it? It's like she was posed like a Hallmark card kind of tableau, and then, don't go to Rome, you know. Oh, I love you, you know. And it was real hard on him. And apparently, he realized after he got there, when he found the conditions of Rome, and I mean bad conditions, in terms of papal facilities and in terms of security of the city itself. And interestingly, and perhaps spookily, is that a word? He died. Yeah. He had gone to bed that night and he said, oh, I'm tired. Got a big journey ahead. I'm going back to Avignon. And he never woke up. Yes. So I ask you, what could it mean? Well, to some, it was a sign from God that Gregory XI shouldn't have had such ideas. Those were very bad ideas. To others, there was the thought, maybe he should never have gone there in the first place. But he did. And so now the cardinals, such as they were, and they must have been quite a crowd, some French, some Italian, they elect this individual. You say, gosh, he hasn't got a happy look. Guess he doesn't know the lyrics to put on a happy face. He takes the title Urban VI, and he wasn't a cardinal, and you say, gosh, it must hurt when you're not a member of the club. Yeah, it does in a way. You say, why didn't I get to be a cardinal? You know, it's like, yeah, but I'm going to be pope. I know, but I wish I'd got to be a cardinal beforehand, you know. And so Urban, seriously, must have had issues. We talk about, I don't have a license to practice, and so I will not try to analyze Urban, but I'll tell you this. The guy had problems, lots of problems. Once he became pope, it was said that he brought the cardinals before him and said, okay, guys, you need to know something. Shape up or ship out. And these cardinals, I mean, they're uppity sorts. They're very powerful. They're big, you know. And more or less,
I just looked like a Delphi client, I didn't sleep last night.
they thought in general that they deserved a lot of respect. He said, we're going to reduce your bank accounts. We're going to help you all pray more. Maybe you could work in a community kitchen. You know, and all of that. And they're looking around, who is this guy? He's some idiotic bureaucrat. You know, this was all a bad old boo-boo. And he did get nasty. Yes, I know. And this is pre-medication. If he could have gotten some help, he said, I can be better, I can be happier. But he got real irritated, do you see? Yeah. So that wasn't nice. And he was probably real sorry the next day. And see, I'm back to normal. I'm having a good day. I'm a happy pope. You know, and you're thinking, wow. Can you, yeah, no. He was a special person. But he would not get most beloved pope by this college of cardinals. And some of the cardinals, may I add, they spoke French, said, you know what? I think when we thought God was talking to us in selecting a new pope, that wasn't God. Okay? That was a bad old voice. I think it was somebody by the name of Satan who said it was God. And some of the others would say, Sacre bleu. You're right. The whole thing was wrong. He's not really Pope. And they said, voila! Yeah. And so then we're ready for the schism. Will the real Pope please stand up? And we'll start there after your break. All right. Your breaks are over. Remember, the times were good, but it's strictly nostalgia now. Now, if you've never heard of Catherine of Siena, and for those who love Italy, Siena's a nice place to visit, if I do say so myself. It's not far from Florence, has some very beautiful churches. I don't know how much of that Catherine got to appreciate. She was one of 24, 25 children. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, they were of the faith, yes. And just multiply, they took that seriously. So, she, like, I think half of them lived. And, which is not surprising considering that particular time. She, to avoid marriage, I think, to her late sister's husband, became a Dominican, which was possible, St. Dominic's order. How literate she was, I don't know, but I know that she was very well informed about life and had people who wrote for her. She may have learned some writing, but she probably did a lot of dictation. And she was a very powerful mystic of the period, very much into her spiritual ideals, St. Catherine of Siena. Unfortunately, I can't pursue that. I can just note that her faith in Rome and the Roman Pope became, as this time period will go on, is what we might even call a lobbyist. Now, many of us use that term in a negative way, but she viewed her job as being the job assigned to her by God. I find it interesting from the point of view of the fact that she was a woman. She died when she was 33 years old, so she was a younger person, and at the same time, she was an important instrument in the support of popes going to Rome and staying in Rome. No more Avignon. You heard me? None. And this, of course, cloaked in her sanctity. Poor soul died at 33, so I'm thinking she probably did not have an easy life in terms of what she ate. I think she lived a very ascetic life, in addition to all her activities. But she has always been admired. In any event, the problem was Urban's unpopularity. And the cardinals of the Italian persuasion said, you know what? We thought God was talking to us, but he wasn't. That was some old imitation. So, Urban VI, they took off these cardinals and they said, and now we will elect the real pope. And they elected one of themselves. Well, he was a dark horse, but he said, shucks, fellas, if you insist. And he took the title Clement the Seventh. Now, if there's anybody in the room who stands up and denounces me now and says, wait, that was the Pope in the reign of Henry VIII, I'll give you partial credit for that, okay? Yes, because that was the real Clement VII. Yes, I know, shocking but true. This is not the real Clement VII. We call him an anti-pope, and you don't want to be that. You want to be the real pope, no antis. An anti means that the Catholic Church doesn't accept you as the real McCoy. That means you don't get to have that number because you were a loser. So, this is Clement VII, and he was elected, and he and his cardinals then go to Avignon. Urban does not have a good day that day. Yeah, I mean, he got a message. He said, sir, I hate to be the one to tell you, but you remember that cardinal that you didn't like that always spoke in French? A bunch of cardinals chose him as pope, and they've said some bad things about you. Ooh, Lord. He acted real ugly. He said, damn them. Or maybe he said they can all go to hell. Yeah, it got pretty rough in that meeting of Urban and his cardinals, because in essence they denounced Urban, saying he was not truly elected, or they had elected him under duress, whatever it may be. And then Clement VII is now in Avignon, and he has his cardinals. So we do have two popes and humiliation. And you would think, I said some pretty rough things, but you know I love you very much. I'm going to stop calling myself Clement VII. So I want you to give me a big hug, and let's just go. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. Both claim to be the true pope. Each one has his own cardinals, and each will almost politic with royal representatives from France, England, wherever it may be, to try to win them over. To say that this is a very, very bad situation is, of course, an understatement. I love the map, and I love these areas. You see the dots? They're called variable obediences. And I'm thinking, you get up, oh, I think I love a pope at Avignon. I just love my French. I don't know exactly what that means, but in general, what you get is the impression there is not freedom of religion. So you're not going like you go the Smiths and the Joneses and the O'Malleys and then saying, which pope are you for? Well, what do you all think? No, I don't think it's that kind of business. The king will tell you, and you take it, and you accept it, and you love whoever he says the pope is. Now, go way up to the north of England and look at that purple. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you something that we all know. Whichever way the English go, the Scots will go differently. And that's exactly what they did here. You'll notice the Scots went for the Avignon Pope, and the English went for the Italian Pope. And again, when you ask yourselves, what made that calculation? Well, of course, it had to do with the king's own interests. And what are the king's interests? Well, I hate to say this, because I don't want to shock you, but I'm going to spit it out. Sometimes the king would say, "What's it worth to you?" You say, "No." Yes. Sometimes you'd have individuals, like you'd have two individuals coming in and saying, "Well, you know, the Pope said I was the new bishop here." And they would say, "Oh, really? Which Pope?" Well, I'm sorry, we're not doing business with that Pope right now. So you can just head on out, buddy. You're a loser. You would be amazed of the revenues that the popes lost. Well, look, they're having to pay double anyway. I mean, look. I mean, it's like, I don't know much about economic things, but you know, in a sale, when they sell all this stuff on sale and you're thinking about that cuts the profit motive, well, think about this. What if you have expectative graces? You'll need to get the 4, you know, when the next 4 die, then you'll get a position or something. Put them on sale or bargain prices, because you've got to pay for 2 papal cohorts. Because neither cohort's going to say, "Oh, gosh, I know it's expensive with an extra pope. Let me just work for, you know, the least possible, and I won't ask for any dental insurance or any." In other words, nobody's going to do that. They all want full benefits, low cost. I mean, they're union. They want all they can get out of this. So the cost of the schism is great, both in terms of budget and in terms, well, let's face it, of moral reputation. Do countries or do monarchies change? Oh, yes. There is nothing permanent about this. I would say the French being loyal to the Pope in Avignon, I mean, that's fairly consistent. And the Italians, except in the extreme south, tend to favor, not surprisingly, the popes in Rome. By the way, the popes in Avignon I'm discussing now are not considered real popes, okay? They're all anti-popes. So you don't have to learn these, okay? Okay, so if I say Clement VII, you'll say, "Oh no, that's 16th century. Yeah, that was Henry VIII, yeah, so you're safe there, okay? We'll see, though. I think it's interesting, though, as you see the map, and then you see where it goes off, and you say, uh-oh, we're going to the Orthodox and the Muslims. You're right. And they're probably having a good laugh over all of this confusion in the West. But you understand, the whole world is not concerned with this schism. It's just where you see the colored areas. Now, there were cardinals from both sides who realized what a terrible disgrace this was. And every time a pope would die, or even get real sick, they would say, "It's about time. He's going down." And so they would sort of gather around him and say, "I bet you're as sad as we are about all the division in the church. Here, let me give you a puff while you..." and he said, "No, I'm fine, thank you very much." God, I hate those people. So the idea that one of the popes was going to renounce his position was becoming increasingly improbable. And the cardinals, I think, in both groups, decided that the most effective way for them to act was to basically leave their particular pope behind. Because you can imagine, you walking out the door and you just hear somebody screaming, damn you, damn you. You know that hurts. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you leave behind and you say, you know, we were glad to support you, but we really did ask you to get behind our reform movement and try to combine it into one pope, and you said no. So we have to leave now. Arrivederci. So all in all then, what it amounted was disobedient cardinals coming together from both groups. And even in Avignon, the French kings were beginning to tire of this. I mean, systems are expensive, folks. I mean, the budgets, I mean, if you, that deficit spending is a no-go. And it's when you got two popes and all of those, you know, people are in the trough, let's just put it that way. Lots of them. And so they meet together at the lovely city of Pisa. And Pisa became the scene of a church council consisting of, I don't want to call them reprobate cardinals because it sounds like they're out driving around on their motorcycles and in leather outfits. But these are simply individuals who have decided that the popes they were following were not worthy. So they form what they call the Council of Pisa, and they elect a pope, and they say to the first two popes, now, we love you as brothers, but you're no longer popes. And you've got to accept that. And you need to go forward and lead good lives. And we wish you well on your journey. And these two individuals said to them, damn you. You go to hell. So yeah, it's these things do not play well. If you're thinking we're going to get to a scene where we're going to sing Kumbaya, you're wrong. You've come to the wrong class, because it isn't going to happen here. In fact, now a third pope will take office. The individual see here who's buried so nicely, I love his tomb, is the second pope of what's called the Pisan line. So you have a Rome line, you have an Avignon line, and now you have a Pisan line. So instead of double, you've gone triple. John 23rd. For individuals who are old enough, you will be aware there was a pope from 1958 to 1963 who was John 23rd. But we've already had a valuable lesson. This was not the real John 23rd. So, we'll call him there just to be polite. But we know that he doesn't get in the big count. As it's sort of like if there was Tilden had been counted as the 1876 president. You know, Rutherford B. Hayes got it. If you counted both of them, well, you know that was very controversial. Is that not a good example? But yeah, the idea is that John 23rd was the pope for a pretty small group, but he was the third chosen. And he was under a lot of pressure to do something. And interestingly, when he was asked, because his background was not the best, they said to him, your record is not particularly good, and in some ways, we would like to reform and kick all three of you out. So he's under some pressure. I think basically they're planning, what do they call that in the real world, the golden parachute? I think poor John 23rd, he doesn't last long. And they say, you know what we would like for you to do? We want you to call a general council, bigger than the Council of Peace, open to kings and bishops and many others. But you've got to call it because we recognize you as Pope. And so he does, and the first act of the new council is to depose him and the other two popes, which I find just real funny. It's like we have to do it in your name, but you realize you're out. You're taking the early retirement. So he will, that's what he'll do. John 23rd, interesting fellow. Because now the church is going to move into something called conciliarism, a doctrine that popes are answerable to church councils, and this has never really been accepted. You heard, like Boniface VIII would have turned over in his grave. Well, you can imagine, because he saw himself as telling them what to do. And now it's more sort of like I used to tell my students, it's sort of like the Board of Trustees tells the president what to do. And sometimes presidents don't like that, and they are free to leave. Well, I suppose the Pope is free to abdicate, but no one ever had. And in this case, the council, which was called by popes, would then basically tell people what the church was going to do. So, this is called the Council of Constance in Germany. And look how long it met, 1414 to 1418. I think they must have met off and on. I don't believe they could meet constantly. It's like the Council of Trent. I'm not sure that you can just go on and on. I think you meet for seasons, and you have so much fun talking about annates and expectative graces and canon law. You just have to take breaks. It's a heady experience. But after they depose all of these popes, they will have a new one selected, and we'll meet momentarily, and they will issue their hopes for new reforms. Now, you're probably thinking ahead to the Council of Trent in the 16th century, or perhaps some of you are thinking of the two Vatican councils in modern times. This is pretty big. I wouldn't say quite on that level, but in terms of reform movements, improved education, trying to cut back on bureaucracy. Oh, and don't forget, we have to deal with pluralism and simony. There's simoniacs running around loose, pluralists, all kinds of evils that, people said, big deal. Yeah, we're going to hurt people who get out of line. So we are really going to get busy, and they try. The problem, of course, will be that sometimes it doesn't necessarily always, that's not the end, I'm sorry, but I will continue down the line. What will happen, essentially, is that Pope Martin V will be elected by the Council of Constance, and as such, he's a member of the Colonna, a great Italian family, and they will say, now, do you agree with the ideas of conciliarism? To repeat, conciliarism refers to the power of the council over the Pope. In other words, popes, like everyone else, have to answer to councils. What is a council? It is a body of the Christian faithful. And you say, theoretically, it could be you and me. It's not, but it could be, because we've got field work to do. Okay. But that is, theoretically, we could be going to church councils and saying, oh, I want to talk some more about that particular passage in canon law, you know, that kind of theoretically. But on and on, we understand that these ideas are going more or less to be ideas that the popes would not necessarily find pleasing. But you know what he'll do? He'll say, sounds good to me, because we understand. There he is, Pope Martin V. And Martin V is going to be a little bit, y'all, I just love a church council. I want to do everything. I just want to say, CC, because I am of Italian extraction. So I will be very agreeable. And we understand, after this wonderful church council meets, he's going to say, now, let's get a few things straight. I run things and you obey. Yeah, I mean, we've had a great time. The whole council movement, it's been real. But the popes that follow will, in essence, try to regain their authorities. And the one thing that popes always have over church councils, and I always like to remind students of this, that popes, like university presidents, are always there, but boards of trustees, I mean, they meet occasionally, and they don't know what's going to happen between meetings. And the same way with these councils. Things change and they're not there, and they say, gosh, what happened? You know, we thought all these reforms were going to take place. But this Pope, Pope Martin V, will now lead the church, and he will lead it shy of this individual. One of the most famous Czechs in history. Yes, this great Czech, Jan Hus, will get ideas from the English heretic, John Wycliffe, and he will be an individual who will teach ideas, and they're both clergy, interestingly, who will teach ideas that are definitely not in the framework of the beliefs of the official church. They're ideas that will be followed after his time by groups called Hussites, and no doubt Luther and other people who were involved in religious movements of the sort were familiar with Huss's ideas. These ideas included taking the Bible literally, the marriage of clergy, the ending of monasticism, the Bible as the only source of truth. Basically, ideas that were antithetical to the views of the Western Church. Now, what makes it interesting in terms of this council is that he was invited to the council as a dissident, and he was given a safe conduct. But when he got there, the members of the council asked him, well, you come on your council now, we want you to recant your ideas, because that's why you're here. And he said, well, I don't recant them. And so the imperial government took him out and executed him, because his safe conduct no longer counted. because he was a heretic who had been given the opportunity to recant his beliefs, and he did not. And he said, well, that's not fair or right. Of course not. But that particular fate of the Hussites is something that we often associate with this council, and realize that as ideas of these become more common. You see, Wycliffe got to die in his bed because he had the protection of an English king's son. So it's not easy to be a heretic in this particular time and get away with it alive. And again, this death, as horrible as it is, will let you understand that any idea of freedom of religion is still very far away from this civilization. But that's one of the effects of the late Middle Ages. We see the breaking up of the Western Catholic Church, which was part of the formation of medieval civilization. By the 15th century, this particular pope denounced councils and said the idea that popes are superior, the councils are over popes, is execrable. And you say, well, that's a bad word. Well, that's what they used. I'm sorry. You see it. That was the name of the document, Execrabilis, Pope Pius II. But the idea that popes have limits, that sometimes it's difficult to determine who the real popes are, and the understanding of their lack of respect and authority is quite clear. But this one will really do it. And this is one of my favorites. You may know this particular Raphael portrait. I do love it so much. He was, yes, he paid dearly for this portrait too, Raphael. Raphael charged, yeah, you didn't get any papal discount. I mean, you paid full dollar, but isn't that just gorgeous? The Leo X we think of, famed for his love of the arts. He was a great horseman, you equestrians. He was the son of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Talk about great banking blood, yeah. So he came from money. He had a great time as Pope there, and he also had the joy, well, if you want to call it that, of being a contemporary of a certain German monk by the name of Martin Luther. And that was not a loving relationship. And that's where we will pick it up. I'll see you all next week. Thank you very much. Thank you.